California is passing a new law that requires parents to affirm their child's gender identity or potentially lose custody of that child. Yeah. This passed in the California Senate today. They did do some amendments to it, and it will go back to the Assembly. It originally passed through the Assembly. Then the Senate got a hold of it. They made various different amendments to it. They've then passed those amendments, and now it's going to go back to the Assembly. The Assembly is likely to pass it, and then it would end up on Gavin Newsom's desk, and he would potentially be signing this into law. So let's go over what this law actually is. This is the tweet that I saw that sparked this whole thing that some people are saying this isn't true, and I'll explain how it's true and how it isn't true. We're going to get into the details here, but this is from Jennifer Kennedy, an attorney who clearly wants to end all vaccine mandates. She says, breaking, California Senate has passed AB 957, the most dangerous law facing California parents in decades, which will require parents to affirm the gender transition of any child, any age, any gender, every family, every time, social or medical transition, no limits, or else lose custody. AB 957 ties affirmation, which is undefined, directly to the health, safety, and welfare of a child. Non-affirming parents will be deemed unsafe. Religious non-affirming parents will be deemed unsafe. Assembly Democrats, Assembly Republicans must stop AB 957 in the Assembly concurrence vote. This insanity will start out of the family code and will take over the rest of codes like kudzu, choking out reasons, science, judicial discretion, freedom. It's vague, arbitrary, capricious, and unconstitutional. So incredibly disappointing to see attorney legislators signing off on this. Let's go over the actual. So what she's saying is somewhat, it is accurate, and it's also not totally accurate. We're going to get into that right now. So let's go over, this is the actual bill, the text of the bill. This is an amendment to the family law, and it is pertaining to gender identity. And the law itself says, in making a determination of the best interests of the child in a proceeding described in Section 3021, the court shall, among any other factors it finds relevant and consistent with Section 3020, consider all of the following. 1A, the health, safety, and welfare of the child. B, as used in this paragraph, the health, safety, and welfare of the child includes, among other comprehensive factors, a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression. Affirmation includes a range of actions and will be unique for each child, but in every case must promote the child's overall health and well-being. It goes on to say in the family code that in making the determination, and remember this is the beginning section, in making a determination of the best interests of the child in a proceeding, the court shall, among other factors, consider, and then it goes beyond gender and it says, a history of abuse by one parent or another person seeking custody against any of the following: a child whom the parent or person is seeking custody, abuse of the other parent, abuse of a cohabitant. It goes through and talks about the abuse aspects of that the court needs to consider. And so here's where it's accurate and not totally accurate in what's trending on social media right now, that California is forcing, if you do not affirm the gender of your child, you will lose custody. That's not, you may lose custody, which is also very bad. No matter how you slice it, it's pretty bad. But the fact that they would even consider that as a factor and not leave that to families to decide on their own, but instead the court intervening and saying, if you don't affirm the child's gender, you may lose custody. In a lot of family custody battles, both parents are great. Both parents, not abusive, take great care of their kids, would be fine parents to have custody. And if it just boils down to gender affirming, which is, by the way, often probably how this would happen, because a lot of the people, we're seeing a lot of more, I would say, privileged families where their one child is, our daughter is now a son, right? We're seeing a lot of this. And so this would be a factor in many of the court cases where the only thing separating the two parents really boils down to who's going to affirm that child's gender. So that is very dangerous. But what it says in here is, in making the determination, the court shall. So when it says shall, That means that the court must. So it doesn't say may. So if it said if the court may, if the language said may, then it's like, okay, this is one of the factors the court could consider. Some of the people, when this has been trending on social media, you've got one group saying California's going to take your child away if you don't affirm gender care. That's not totally accurate. And then you got another group saying, well, that's not true. All they're doing is saying it's one of the factors that a judge could possibly consider. That's also not really true. The judge has to consider this. This is in the language. When it says the court shall, then the court must actually look into the gender affirming. If that's something that is pertinent to the case, the judge has no choice but to consider that in the case. It's not like, well, that's one of the factors I could look into. No, the judge has to. That's what shall means. So this is being written into the family code telling judges in particular, you have to look at all when you're looking at a child custody case, you have to look at all of these different factors. Are they being abused? Who is spending most time with the child? Who's been in the child's life, the majority of the child's life? Who's affirming their gender care? This is what's really bizarre about this is that you don't really see in this family code other factors that are medical written into this as we're not seeing anything about vaccine mandates, right? So there isn't this, are you going to force your child into a vaccine that potentially could give them myocarditis? Or are you the one who's not wanting to give them that because they've already had COVID 3 times and you don't feel like it's necessary for them? They're not building that into these bills. They're instead building in gender affirming care, which would force the judges to consider it. And again, if it boils down to all things being equal and the only thing not is the parents disagreeing, and in fact, this is the type of stuff that causes divorce in the first place. This is the type of stuff that would cause a child custody battle because the two adults cannot agree. One kid comes home and says, by the way, I'm now a boy. I was a girl. I want to be a boy now. And one parent is ultra, into that and watching all of her friends and saying, okay, yes, you're a boy. Now I've got a little boy, no problem. And the other parent says, heck no, this is a phase. This is not legitimate. We're not going to buy into this. We're going to just let this pass. We're not going to go dragging her to psychiatrists and doctors and pumping her full of hormones and doing all these things. We're not doing that. That's the type of argument that causes divorce. So then these parents divorce and all things are equal and they go in front of the judge and the parent says, well, we're divorcing and I'm asking for sole custody of my child because my spouse will not affirm their gender. And that's caused our divorce and that's caused me to seek full custody of the child. Now it's written into California law. The judge, no matter the judge's personal feelings on the situation, will have to consider that no matter what. And the bill is written in a way that it's basically saying that, affirmation includes a range of actions and will be unique for each child, but in every case, it must promote the child's overall health and well-being. So I suppose another way to spin this and look at it is it could be that if a parent is pushing a child into switching genders, that could potentially also, according to the language of how this is written, that could also work against that parent. So one parent could drag the other to court and say they are, they just want to fit in with their friends, their coffee lunch group friends, yoga friends, and they're pushing our child into thinking that they're a different gender. Our child is not a different gender. It's causing harm to our child. This is not something that is natural for our kid, and they're just doing that. Could potentially also, in using this language, it could also work against that parent who's pushing the child into this, because it's in making a determination for the best interest of the child in a proceeding, the court shall factor in among other comprehensive factors, a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe because the language is written that it's a parent's affirmation. They're saying that they have to consider the parent's affirmation. So I'm affirming your gender as this affirmation. But maybe it could be, this is why there's other judges that then look at these laws as judges as they read these laws and they say, well, we don't really agree with how the language is written. And so it could mean, that the parent who's pushing the gender identity also could be in trouble. another judge might read that and say, no, it's only going against parents who are not willing to affirm their child's gender care. It gets a little bit tricky there, and that's why there's judges, and that's why this is probably going to be challenged in court if this actually passes, which it probably will because it's California. So I want to read this to you. This is the summary. When the Senate amended this, they have this, they wrote up kind of a summary of this bill and what they did. And they said here, this is according to the analysis. It says requires a court to consider a minor's gender identity or gender expression when determining the best interest of the child as specified. So these are the amendments they're making to this. They say that the major provisions are it requires a court when determining the best interests of a child in a child custody or visitation proceeding to consider, among other factors, a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression. The Senate amended the original bill that went through the assembly, and they deleted, here's what's interesting, the Senate deleted in their amendment a naming provision of the bill. And the naming provision required parents to affirm the new name of the child, essentially. That they would have to show up to court and do the whole name change thing. And it actually stated that they would need to, let me see if I actually have the, what they struck. So the Senate at least had a little bit more sanity than the Assembly. The Assembly, when they originally wrote this bill, all they did was write in a blanket one-liner where they said that the judge must consider a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity. They didn't say, in addition to other things, they must consider this. So the Assembly is a little bit more hardcore than the California Senate, and the Assembly was just like, they really wrote it in a way where if you did not affirm your child's gender identity, you could lose custody of your kid, and that could be the only, like, that's it. That wouldn't make sense. I mean, it would be a terrible situation if you've got one parent who's extremely abusive, has got a lot of problems, but they're willing to affirm the gender identity, and the other parent who's the stable one and is not willing to could potentially lose custody just on that one thing alone. So the Senate actually expanded on that and said, well, okay, you must consider that as well as other things. Don't say, well, just because you won't affirm their gender, the abusive parent gets custody. But you have to understand a lot of the activists, that is how a lot of them think. They do think that the abusive parent should maybe get custody because they think it's even more abusive to not affirm your child's gender care. They believe that causes suicide. So you might have a parent that's a little bit abusive, but hey, you're not going to go kill yourself. The parent over here that's not willing to affirm your gender care might end up with you dead. Now, we know from a lot of the science and the data and the stats that that's not true, that the suicide rates have been boosted significantly. And that suicide rates are the same for many trans people, even after they transition. So there's a lot of, they're just kind of making stuff up as they go when it comes to pushing this ideology on people. There's no doubt about that. But at least the Senate had a little bit more sanity in them, and they actually spelled it out. Another thing the Senate did that was a little bit more sane was that they got rid of this naming provision that stated if a non-consenting parent objects to a name and gender marker change to affirm the minor's gender identity, the court shall, again, shall means you must. The court shall strongly consider that affirming the minor's gender identity is in the best interest of the child pursuant to Section 3011 of the Family Code. So the judge would have to say, according to what the Assembly wanted, the judge would have to say, yeah, that affirming the child's gender is in the best interest of the child without even knowing that child, without even knowing that family, without even knowing that child's friends who might all be in this fad and trend at school. Not knowing any of that, the California Assembly actually wanted to force judges even into saying, then this is in the best interest of the child. We have to change their gender legally. So their gender marker on any of their papers and their name, we've got to change. It's just insane. I cannot believe the state I am living in. It's a bit nutty, but let's go on with this comment. So the Senate deleted the naming provisions of the bill. They also clarified the provision of the existing law that enumerates the factors that a court must consider in determining the best interest of a child when making orders regarding the physical or legal custody or visitation of children, to include a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression. So again, they didn't make it the only thing to consider, but they said it's one of the factors that you could consider when determining the overall health and welfare of a child. So they said here in the comments, this bill would require the court, when making an order regarding the physical or legal custody or visitation of children, to consider a parent's affirmation of their child's gender identity or gender expression. So it requires the court to do that. The bill specifies that affirmation includes a range of actions and will be unique for each child, but in every case must promote the child's overall health and well-being. This does not necessarily require the court to side with the parent that affirms a child's gender identity. Existing law requires the court to consider several factors which prioritize the health, safety, and welfare of the child. For example, the court is required to consider, among other factors it deems relevant, whether either parent has a history of abusing drugs or alcohol or of committing acts of physical abuse. The court may also consider the nature of the amount of contact that the child has had with both parents. This bill would merely add a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression as an additional factor that the court would weigh in favor of the best interest of the child. Notwithstanding the concerns of some opponents, the bill does not mark a major change in family law policy. That's what they claim. The courts will continue to give paramount importance to the best interest of the child based on multiple factors, and affirmation of gender identity or gender expression will be added as one of those factors. It's insane. There's a lot of factors that parents don't agree on, whether or not to get your kids' ears pierced. Do they want to add that to the family law code, that the judge must consider whether or not the who wants to pierce the child's ears at the age of 1 year old, or who wants to wait until they're 10? I mean, spanking, that's not in here. Some consider that abuse, others don't. That seems to be up for interpretation. That's not built into this law. How you feed your child, whether or not you give your child a bunch of junk food, or if you feed your child broccoli and chicken breasts every night, that's not written in this family code. That's how insane this is. It's so insane that they would say gender affirmation is more important. What if your kid comes to you and just says, I'm depressed? Has nothing to do with gender affirmation. They're like, no, I'm a girl. I'm still a girl, but I'm just really depressed. They're claiming that the reason why they have to put this in here is for the health and welfare of the child, because if you don't affirm their gender, they're going to commit suicide. Plenty, and I mean the majority of youth who commit suicide do it not because of their gender being not being affirmed to them. They're committing suicide for a variety of other reasons, but you don't see that written into the family code. That's how absurd this is. They don't care actually about the health and welfare of your child. They don't care if you feed your child junk food all day. They don't care if you keep your kid off of, you don't let them go to a therapist because they're telling you that they got other problems. They don't care if you do you could neglect your child in practically every other way, as long as you don't abuse them physically, do a bunch of drugs and alcohol, and, as long as you just continue to affirm whatever gender they tell you that they are, then, everything else, all bets are off. That's insane. That's insane. So they have in here the arguments in support and the arguments in opposition, and they wrote this into the analysis. It says Equality California, which is the one who's supporting this, says one of the co-sponsors of the bill, writes that while states across the country are passing discriminatory policies attacking LGBTQ plus people, especially transgender and non-binary youth, AB 957 will ensure that California TGI youth have access to a legal system that affirms and protects their health, safety, and livelihood. EC notes that while TGI youth face higher rates of mental illness and suicidal thoughts, research shows that they do much better with supportive parents who affirm rather than disapprove of their gender identity. EC also observes that while the family code lists several factors that a court should consider when determining the best interests of the child, it fails to take into account this very vulnerable population of TGI children who are at an increased risk of harm. This bill, EC concludes, will center the health and well-being of TGI youth by clarifying that affirming their gender identity is in their best interest. So it says also that the California chapter of National Association of Social Workers believes this bill is important for transgender youth, as it prioritizes the best interest of the child for legal name change and custody decision purposes. They note that California has already taken strides to protect transgender youth, and that this bill will offer further protection to transgender youth if they come to California from such states as Alabama, which criminalizes gender-affirming care. They also note that its code of ethics includes advocating for social justice for those who are marginalized and vulnerable. This bill would do just that, ensuring that transgender youth dignity and worth is upheld, and the court system ensures their gender identity is affirmed, with the nation increasingly creating anti-trans youth bills. This is a necessary countermeasure. Is it, though, or is it actually abusive? to, I think it's abusive. I personally believe that I'm a big proponent of medical freedom, so I do think that you should have control over your decisions, and I think even over your children. I do think that you should have the right as a parent to decide what is in the best interest of your child. I think doctors and psychologists and the medical community should be held accountable in that there should be a big, I'd say, societal, moral, and ethical push to get them to stop performing surgeries and prescribing medications that are ultimately damaging to a person's health. And this is akin to giving people a lobotomy. There was a time when if you suffered from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or just you were a wild woman, in the case of one of the Kennedys, um, then your family could drag you into a doctor and get you a lobotomy. We now know that lobotomies are terrible, that this the medical procedure to try to cure a mental health problem was a disaster on every account, an absolute disaster. And yet here we are doing it again, thinking that the way to treat mental illness, and this is clearly mental illness, the way to treat mental illness is through some sort of medical procedure that ultimately ends up being a disaster. But this is where we're at. We're back to the days of lobotomies. So the arguments in opposition, the California Capital Connection opposes this bill because it will undermine the current law that allows parents to object to their child's request for a change of gender and or name on government documents. They fear this bill will instead force family courts to ignore the parents' objections and rule in favor of the minor's request. Parents are responsible for the well-being of their children. Parents should have the final say in every major decision a minor makes. Finally, the California Capital Connection points to a higher law. The Bible and nature also teach us that there are only two genders. Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the name of God created he him, male and female created he them." I wish they wouldn't go there with this. There's no reason to bring in religion or God or the Bible. Once you go down that road, I think you kind of lose your argument, to be honest with you, because you can't prove. I get it. Many people believe God exists. Many people read the Bible every day. I was one of those people for a very long time. But you can't prove it. You just can't totally. You can feel it. You have faith. That's why it's called faith. But to build that, to use that as an argument when you're trying to win, I was going to say over logic, but then again, they're not acting logical on the other side, are they? They're not acting with logic either. They're using emotion. So, you know what? By all means, use faith. I mean, if they're going to use emotion to say, well, we must do this because they're using emotion and fitting into fads. You know, if they're going to do that, then by God, whatever, use whatever argument you want on the other side to try to oppose it. It's not going to end up being it's not going to work. I mean, you're going to lose on this one in California. So, because that's where we're at. So this is an incredibly scary thing in the state of California. The state of California has taken away choice for parents. Children in this state were, they tried to force vaccine mandates on kids. Otherwise, they couldn't go to schools. Parents pushed back on that. Now they're trying to tell parents, affirm your child's gender care or lose custody of your child. And the way this is written is that the child could say, if both parents don't approve of that child's gender affirmation, they don't affirm the child's new gender, the child can seek a guardian and could say, my parents suck. Everything's fine. They're married. We have a good home. Nobody's abused. Nobody's on alcohol, drugs. Nobody's doing anything bad. But my parents aren't affirming my gender. That child could, according to this, go and find a new guardian and potentially win in court. That is very, very scary. So that's what's going on in the state of California. So there is some truth to it. It's not that you will lose custody of your child if you don't affirm their gender. It's just that you may lose your child. And that is bad enough, actually. Everything I just told you, it's bad enough. And that's where we're at with this. So I will keep you posted if they actually pass this law, if Gavin Newsom actually signs it. And we'll see if other states follow suit. This could be a very dangerous precedent set for parents, losing control of your children, not being able to actually decide what is in the best interest of your kids. This is the vote, by the way, on the screen right here. 30 of the California senators voted yes, 9 voted no. but 30 of them actually voted yes, and this is how it passed. I mean, and that it's crazy. It's totally bonkers, completely bonkers. All right. Do you think your face enjoyed the summer as much as you did? Because I know I always end up with more dark spots and damage than before the season began, but that's where Genucel comes in. Genucel is an amazing skincare line formulated by a pharmacist who started off just making his cream for locals until it just blew up in popularity. And now you can have the same luxury skincare, and it's for both men and women. So, yes, guys, we know you care about your skin too. The new dark spot corrector from Genucel is a must have after months of record heat and humidity. Sunspots, brown spots, discoloration, and even red inflamed patches all disappear in front of your very eyes. And here's the amazing guarantee. They have a Genucel amazing guarantee. You'll see results day one or your money back. So take advantage of the Genucel most popular package, which is what it's called when you go on their website. It's called the most popular package, which now includes the dark spot corrector, plus the classic Genucel bags and puffiness treatment and immediate effects, all at about 70% off. So you can try the best skincare in the world for yourself completely risk-free. Lots of returning customers to Genucel, 300%, like people just absolutely love it. It's simple. Just go to genucel.com/Kim today and start looking years, even decades younger tomorrow. That's genucel.com/Kim. Say goodbye to those dark spots, liver spots, bags, and puffiness under your eyes. That link is down below.